Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Excited to be here.
This time, we're really tackling a question that has, well, kind of puzzled people for centuries. Looking out for number one, can that actually make everyone better off?
Hmm.
It's a tough one, or a question with no easy answers. To really explore this, though, we're going back to the roots, I like it, of economic thought. Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and John Maynard Keynes. Right.
And it's just fascinating to see how these thinkers, separated by time and context,
Mm,
how they grappled with this tension, this fundamental tension
yeah.
between individual ambition and, well, collective well-being.
It's a big one.
It really is. And their ideas,
Yeah.
right, forged in these periods of radical change and upheaval, I mean, they still shape how we think about economics today. It's incredible.
It's wild, right? It's not just like dusty old theory.
No, not at all.
We're talking about ideas that are playing out right now in our world of like globalization, technological disruption. I mean, heck, even the gig economy.
Oh, absolutely.
And thankfully, you have provided me with some excerpts from their writing, their biography. So let's unpack these thinkers and their ideas, see what resonates. Let's
Let's do it. Let's start with Adam Smith, often hailed, as the father of capitalism. We tend to associate him with this idea of the invisible hand guiding the market, right? But there's much more to his thinking than just that, especially when you consider his views on morality.
Well, that's interesting. It's funny you should mention that because one of the excerpts that you shared has this line from Smith that really jumped out at me. He says, "Don't try to be good. Let good be the byproduct of selfishness." Which is, well, it's a provocative statement.
It is.
And to be honest, a bit jarring coming from someone who's considered, a champion of free markets.
It's certainly a statement that gets people talking, for sure. And it kind of perfectly encapsulates Smith's core belief, this idea of self-interest as a driving force for economic prosperity.
Okay.
He argued, you see, that when individuals pursue their own economic interests, their own goals, their own ambitions, it creates this ripple effect
Right.
that ultimately benefits society as a whole.
So,
The baker bakes bread to make a profit, not necessarily out of the goodness of their heart. But the end result is still delicious bread that feeds the community.
Exactly. Exactly. And if that baker wants to stay in business, right, they need to bake bread that people want to buy, bread that's good at a price people are willing to pay. That's the invisible hand at work.
Right.
This self-regulating mechanism where supply and demand, they're driven by countless individual decisions.
Right.
And it ultimately leads to a more efficient allocation of resources. Or that's the theory.
What's
anyway.
fascinating to me, though, is that Smith didn't view self-interest and morality as being mutually exclusive. In fact,
No.
he wrote extensively about empathy and our innate desire for social approval.
Absolutely. His concept of the impartial spectator, this internal moral compass, it's crucial here. It allows us to step outside of ourselves and judge our actions, you see, from a more objective perspective.
So it's like even when we think no one's watching, we have this internalized sense of what's socially acceptable.
Right.
Influences our behavior even in the economic sphere.
Precisely. Smith argued that this impartial spectator, it helps to temper our self-interest. It kind of nudges us towards actions that are not only beneficial to ourselves, but also align with broader societal values.
It's almost like he's anticipating what we now call nudges in behavioral economics. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
that
like-
subtle cues and appeals to our social nature can influence our decision making.
Exactly. It's a fascinating connection, and it just highlights how Smith's ideas remain surprisingly relevant centuries later, even as our understanding of human psychology and economics has evolved. But, while Smith saw the potential for individual ambition to fuel collective well-being, not everyone shared his optimistic outlook.
Right.
Enter Karl Marx. Writing during the throes of the Industrial Revolution, he saw a much darker side to unfettered capitalism.
And the source material you gave me paints a pretty grim picture of the working conditions back then. Yeah.
Fact-
Where people, including children, it was
different time.
for
Boy.
hours in dangerous conditions, for meager wages. I mean, it's hard to imagine that being anyone's vision of a prosperous society.
It certainly challenges that rosy notion that self-interest naturally leads to a harmonious society. And it's within this context of, rampant inequality and exploitation that Marx develops his critique of capitalism.
And he
Okay.
Introduces this concept of material dialectics.
Okay.
drawing on Hegel's theory of history, but grounding it in the economic realities of the time.
So instead of ideas driving history, it's more about who controls the resources and production, factories, right?
Exactly. Marx argued that the fundamental conflict in capitalism is between the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production, and the proletariat,
Right.
working class who sell their labor. And he saw this relationship, this fundamental relationship, as inherently exploitative, with capitalists extracting surplus value from the workers.
And that term surplus value,
Right.
it feels, I don't know, it feels particularly relevant today when you think about the gig economy.
Yeah.
Got companies, right, building these billion-dollar valuations
Right.
off the labor of workers who often lack, basic benefits and job security.
Yeah.
Like Marx's critique is, I don't know, finding new life in the digital age in a way.
That's a really astute observation, because Marx argued that capitalism has this inherent tendency
Okay.
to concentrate wealth and power
In
in
the
the hands of the few.
Right.
And whether you're talking about factory owners in the 19th century or tech giants today, that critique still resonates.
For sure.
But Marx didn't just, offer a critique.
Right.
He also envisioned a solution, albeit a radical one, a worker revolution that overthrows capitalism and ushers in this classless society.
Right. And while those revolutions didn't quite play out as he predicted, at least in the West,
Yeah,
his ideas have had a profound impact
they
on
have.
political movement and labor rights struggles around the world.
Absolutely.
But I kind of want to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Bring in our third economic giant into this conversation, John Maynard Keynes.
Okay.
He comes on the scene in the early 20th century, time when the capitalist system is, well, it's facing a different kind of crisis.
Yeah.
Depression.
The Great Depression, exactly. And unlike Marx, who saw it as, we need to dismantle this whole capitalist system.
Right.
Keynes was more interested in saving capitalism from itself, right?
Well-
He was a pragmatist, deeply embedded in the world of policy and government. And he saw firsthand the devastating consequences of economic collapse.
So while classical economists were clinging to this idea that the market would eventually self-correct,
Right.
Keynes was looking for solutions.
Mhm.
I mean, immediately, right? To alleviate the suffering of mass unemployment,
Of course, yeah.
economic stagnation, he wasn't content to just wait for the invisible hand to work its magic.
Exactly. Keynes recognized that in times of deep economic crisis, while the invisible hand could stay invisible for a very long time,
Right.
he argued that someone needed to step in
Okay.
and stimulate demand, get money flowing back into the economy, and he believed that someone was the government.
That's a pretty radical departure. From the laissez-faire approach that had dominated economic thinking for decades.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that the government should play an active role
Right.
in managing the economy. It was downright heretical to some.
It's a major turning point in economic thought, for sure.
Yeah.
Keynes argued that government spending, even if it meant running a budget deficit,
Right.
could jumpstart a sluggish economy, provide jobs,
Right.
put people back to work.
Right.
It's the classic example of spend money to make money.
And we see this idea, right, play out in real world policies. Yeah. The
Like-
New Deal in the United States during the 1930s, these massive public works projects, aimed at putting people back to work, stimulating the economy. It's a far cry from Smith's vision of a self-regulating market act.
It is. And yet, it's important to remember that Keynes wasn't advocating for some kind of, socialist utopia.
Right.
He still believed in the power of markets.
Okay.
But he also recognized their limitations and the need for government intervention to kind of, smooth out the rough edges of capitalism, especially during times of crisis.
I don't know about you, but it's interesting to think about how these three economic giants, separated by all this time, all these different circumstances, how they might have viewed the economic challenges that we're facing right now.
Yeah.
They don't.
Man.
What a debate that would be. To hang out.
Right. It would be quite the lively discussion, that's for sure. Imagine Adam Smith, right? Champion of free markets, navigating a world of online marketplaces and Bitcoin. It's wild. I suspect he'd be, fascinated and a bit wary, maybe.
Yeah.
Of the sheer concentration of wealth and power in the hands of these tech giants today.
It's true. And I can just picture Karl Marx, witnessing the rise of automation, the gig economy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I told you so. See? I told you so.
I told you.
The exploitation of workers, this relentless drive for profit. I mean, those concerns, they remain as relevant as ever.
Yeah.
Especially now in our hyper-connected world.
Absolutely. And I imagine he'd be particularly focused on the global implications, you see, of capitalism, the vast disparities in wealth and opportunity between, the developed and the developing world. It's not difficult at all to envision him aligning with movements for social and economic justice, especially in the face of such stark inequalities.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And then there's Keynes, right? Yeah. Always the pragmatist, always looking for those solutions within the existing system.
Right.
He'd surely be urging policymakers, I think, to find ways to ensure a more equitable distribution of the benefits of all this technological progress.
Yeah.
Maybe even revisiting this whole idea of a universal basic income, especially as automation continues to disrupt all these traditional employment models.
You can almost picture him, right? Gathered with world leaders, advocating for these strategic government investments in education and infrastructure, not just as a means of stimulating the economy, but also as a way to prepare the workforce for the jobs of the future. Like, it's about harnessing the power of all this innovation, but also mitigating its potential downsides at the same time.
Totally. It's fascinating to consider how these thinkers from such different eras would grapple with these complexities of our modern world, But their ideas, though, they provide a framework, as like a set of lenses, right?
Yeah.
Through which we can view the challenges of globalization, technological disruption, and yes, even that age-old question of how to create a more just and equitable society.
And that's what makes, diving deep into these economic giants so incredibly rewarding, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Their ideas, they really do transcend their historical context. They challenge us, to think critically about the world around us, to question our assumptions.
Right.
And to engage in these meaningful conversations about the kind of future that we want to build.
It's a good reminder, I think, that economics is not just about numbers and graphs. It's about human behavior. It's about values.
It's about people.
Yeah, and ultimately, the choices that we make.
Exactly. It's about understanding those forces that shape our lives, both visible and invisible, and recognizing that we have the power to influence those forces. We're not just passive observers in this economic drama. We're active participants.
We are. And on that note, we want to hear from you, our listener. Yeah. If Smith, Marx, and Keynes were alive today, what economic questions do you think they'd be grappling with? What insights from their work, right, really resonate with you in our present moment? Let us know. Join the conversation. We're on social media. Let's keep this deep dive going. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking out those aha moments, the ones that expand your understanding of the world.